And welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. Great to have on today representatives from Lifewise Academy, an exciting new ministry. We have Joel Penton, the CEO, and also Ben, who is an advancement rep working specifically in the state of Indiana. As we launch into this episode, I want to just preface the episode by saying this. Today, we're going to talk about what I would consider to be the greatest, if not maybe one of the greatest, but I'm really kind of leaning towards the greatest missed opportunity of the church in about the last 70 years. And so I'm going to just leave that hang right there. Joel and Ben, how are you guys doing today?
Doing great. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah,
It's a
Ben.
pleasure to be here, Josh.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Joel and Ben. So, Joel, we're going to start with you, the CEO of Lifewise, and I will jump into a few of your credentials here in a second. But I love starting the podcast just with a recent story, a meaningful story about what God is doing through your ministry. And so, Joel, maybe you just share something with us about how God is moving.
Sure. Well, I think of a story about a little boy who you could actually see part of his story on our website in a video, a boy named Christian. But I heard a recent update to his story that's pretty exciting that kind of illustrates the opportunity and even the growth of our ministry. So we provide Bible education to public school students during school hours with Lifewise, and Christian's mother received a postcard in the mail about our program and saw it said, "Hey, Bible-based character education during the school day." She thought, well, I have a church background, but I haven't ever taken my kids to church. I've never talked to them about Jesus. I've been kind of not engaged with my faith in any way. So I'll sign Christian up for this class. And lo and behold, Christian goes and he falls in love with Jesus, falls in love with Scripture, asks his Lifewise teacher to invite his mother to church. And that leads to the whole family getting plugged in, Christian getting into the baptism class, his mother getting into a weekly Bible study. And for the last 2 years, that family's been plugged in and growing and couldn't be bigger fans of Lifewise Academy, our ministry. But then here's the chapter I just heard that due to, I believe, a work situation, Christian's family had to move to another school district and did the research and found out there was not a Lifewise Academy at the school. And Christian was really sad. And so he and his teacher and mother have been praying that a Lifewise would start there. And lo and behold, when Christian went to his open house or orientation day at the school, he saw set up a Lifewise booth because fall, Lifewise is opening at that school, his brand new elementary school. And so he is able to continue his Bible education. And so it, to me, shows not only, the power of the opportunity, getting that family plugged in, but also then the impact of the program, getting the family plugged into church, and then the quick growth of the opportunity because now it's at this new school where Christian is going. And so the Lord gets all the credit, and he is really moving in some amazing ways.
That's awesome. And I've just been blessed having met Lifewise Academy actually just maybe a few months ago, just to see it now other places. And every time we talk, the numbers and resources that you printed are outdated because God continues to just throw open the doors. So blessed to get to know the ministry and to see what God's doing. So jump into just a little bit of your background. We have on Joel Penton, who's the founder and CEO of Lifewise Academy, a program that provides Bible education to public school students during school hours. And I was looking at the bio. I know some of these numbers are outdated already, but looking, I think, up closer to 317, maybe 321 confirmed schools around the country that are now doing this, having launched in 2019. That's just exponential growth. A little bit of Joel's background. He founded Stand for Truth and a speakers network. He spoke in 3,000 public schools, 2 million students nationwide. Also played for Ohio State, playing football. And now he's tackling a much more difficult task, I think, of launching this all over the country. And then Ben is with us from Northeast Indiana, advancement director for Lifewise Academy in the state of Indiana, seeing some great growth there in the Northeast part of the state. So jumping into this topic just a little bit, I have a pet peeve as I talk to Christian citizens around the country. And one of them is I so often hear people mark the moral decline of the country from the removal of prayer and Bible reading in schools. But if you remember, this Bible reading was somebody maybe going to the PA, reading one verse. But that's important. That's good. But also it was often just a generic civil prayer. And so when somebody says that, I'm like, well, hold on. I think there are a lot of other factors, including maybe it was taking disciple making out of church. Maybe that was something that affected a lot of things. But again, I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, maybe the greatest missed opportunity of the last 70 years in Zorach versus Clauson, allowing public schools to release kids during the school day to religious education. So maybe we shouldn't complain so much about not being able to say a generic civil prayer. Play a little bit more about, well, we kind of missed the opportunity of having kids in like an hour-long actual Bible class where they got the Word of God. Maybe that was something that we missed. And that's, again, the big idea of Lifewise Academy. So, Joel, you have written the book during school hours. So as we and I have a copy here, we'll also link to it in the show notes. But I wanted to dig back into the history just a little bit before we get into the nuts and bolts. And we're going to get into how you launch one of these things. But would you share a little bit about the history of biblical education in public schools, kind of leading up to Zorach versus Clauson? And then we'll talk a bit about that case.
Yeah, great question. So the history of religious instruction in America is in some ways tragic because Bible education was one of the forces that drove even the start of broad public education. It was explicit desires for children to be able to read the Bible that drove society to want everyone to be able to read. In fact, you have the old Deluder Act in Massachusetts that famously explicitly says our communities need to find a way to educate their children, and it gives the reason, and that is so that these children can read the Bible and then not be deceived. And so that was one of the driving forces behind this broad education of society that little by little was eroded. And as the educational system became more standardized from state to state, in the beginning, you had it was more sectarian, the religious instruction based on the geographical locale of these communities. But as things became more and more standardized, the differences and denominational differences became flattened more and more until secularism and the scientific revolution started to then erode those religious ed as well. And in the 1950s or 40s and 50s is when the courts got involved, and case after case after case, prayer was struck down in schools, Bible reading was struck down in schools. And very few people realized, though, that amidst all of that, amidst this just avalanche of the removal of religious instruction from the public school day, there was this big win of protecting the ability for communities to teach their public school children the Bible as part of their public school day, and that's called released time religious instruction. But as you said, for 70 years, it has been lying dormant under the radar. Very few people know it's possible.
So just a couple of quick notes on what you were saying. One, it strikes me as I can only imagine either a state or federal law titled the Old Deluder Act, meaning Satan, the Old Deluder. These days, it certainly marks how far we've come. And I did want to mention, I certainly lament the fact that public education is where it is, and that the very basis of morality, it has been stripped away from character formation. And I think we're seeing the effects of trying to base a nation on equality when we don't have a foundation for truth. And we're trying to tell kids, well, here's how you should act, here's how you should behave. And then we're having this massive mental health crisis. So I certainly don't celebrate the fact that we are where we are, but in the podcast, I often mention, I try to be a hopeful realist in the sense we just realize where we are. I'm hopeful because of Christ and the fact that there's an empty grave, but we have to just recognize where we are right now. Would you dig into a little bit more for those that aren't familiar with Zorach versus Clauson, just a little bit of what happened there in New York and kind of fact patterns. So when they look at Lifewise Academy, I'm sure you have people still that are like, can I do that? Or are we going to get sued?
Right.
So what was the fact pattern there? And kind of tie that into how Lifewise has been formed.
Sure. Well, there were two cases. There was the McCollum case that was just before Zorach, where a program that's somewhat similar was struck down, and that there was basically a Bible education program that was run by local pastors, if I'm not mistaken, but it was taking place inside the public school, and it was compulsory in that students, I believe they maybe had to opt out of the class if they didn't want to take it. And that in 1948 was struck down. And then in 1952, Zorach versus Clauson in New York, there was a release time program challenge that was upheld by the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court outlined this is constitutional. This religious instruction program is constitutional because, number one, it's not happening on school property. Students are being taken off of school property. Number two, it's not publicly funded. It is all private dollars. And number three, it's not compulsory. Students have to give parental permission. And those are the big three that came out of that. And those are the big three that remain to this day, that it needs to be off school property, privately funded, and with parental permission. And as you said, many people, when they hear about it, they think this sounds illegal, or they think this must be just some sort of loophole. In fact, I've heard that off the lips of school board members. Oh, they're using some sort of loophole, but far from that. I mean, the case itself was specifically about a religious instruction program taking place during school hours. And the Supreme Court spoke very clearly, this is constitutional. And now there are 26 state laws. 26 of the states have laws on the books, including the state of Indiana, as well as Ohio, where I am, that specifically spell out release time religious instruction.
So 6-3 decision, and Justice Douglas, who wrote the opinion, said that this did not violate either the establishment of religion or interfere with the free exercise of religion. And I love one quote from the case. This is, there's no constitutional requirement which makes it necessary for government to be hostile to religion and to throw its weight against efforts to widen the effective scope of religious influence. And what struck me, now this has been on the books for 70 years, but even just what are the chances of any challenge now? The Supreme Court has really leaned into a case like Fulton. And I won't go into some of the nuts and bolts, listeners may be familiar, but had to do with Catholic charities providing foster care services. That if government's involved in a program or offering something, it can't cut something out because it has a religious viewpoint. That is not neutrality. It cuts against neutrality. It's hostility towards religion. And so I appreciated that particular note. And it really leans into or kind of runs alongside what our current Supreme Court is doing and saying, look, it's a plural society. Okay. We, even if you're a secular, quote unquote, secular school, you can't completely kick religious influence out of the school, especially if it's offsite, if it's privately funded and it's not compulsory. So encourage listeners maybe to look up the case if you're interested further. But again, it just struck me, as you pointed out, Joel, that this has been lying dormant for 70 years. There have been efforts to do some of this, but certainly nothing on a national scale. So I'm just really encouraged that Lifewise is stepping into that role. Ben, let me throw one to you here. What are the nuts and bolts of a Lifewise Academy, and how does a community start such a ministry in partnership with your group? And they may think, oh, this sounds like a great idea. We'll go just try to do this on our own. I encourage listeners, this is a significant lift because you have to have relationships with churches, but you also have to have relationships with the schools, and this can be complex. So Ben, would you jump in? What are some of the nuts and bolts of starting an academy?
Yeah, no, I'd love to speak on this because I actually have gotten to experience Lifewise Academy from both sides of the spectrum. I was a volunteer starting in 2020, working to get this up and running in my community. And then I've been on staff for over a year now, helping other communities get up and running. And so it's been incredible to watch our 10-step launch process get refined. It is so good now. Dozens and dozens of people have put energy into this, refining it and making it what it is today. And so now we've got it nailed down pretty well, so much to the point that I would say it's even a proven 10-step launch process that that I encourage people, hey, let's just focus on one step at a time, because it can seem overwhelming from some of the things that you've mentioned. And it did to me early on as well. And so the first step that every community wants to do is they just got to get on our website, and they got to go to the Find Your School tab, and they're going to look up their state, they're going to find their school district, and they're going to get their name on that. And so that is our initial touch point. As we develop and get more signatures on that community interest list, the community is able to further themselves through our 10-step launch process. And all along the way, we're going to have coaches there to help them navigate each step. But that's the number one thing to do is to start there, because that gets you on our radar and we can reach out to you directly.
And we won't go through maybe all 10 steps. And having reviewed this, it is very simple. And I really appreciate that. Working with churches, I know church leaders are busy. Last thing we need is just kind of this new, another program, woohoo, I'm sure they're just waiting for that. But this is drawing together community interests, having a little bit of money raised to show that the group is, hey, we have some skin in the game here. And then what I so appreciate about this is Lifewise does the heavy lifting of making sure people are background screened, of working with the local school. And the ministries that I work with, I often look for a few things. One is, are you working with and through the local church? Lifewise Academy is doing exactly that. Pointing people to Jesus, absolutely. But then also, and want to make sure we're doing this as well, but things are being done with excellence. And I can absolutely say Lifewise does everything with excellence. And so, Ben, how many particular school districts have launched in Northeast Indiana, maybe around the state? And of course, we have national audience here, but maybe just talking about how it's going in one particular place.
Absolutely. So this year, we're super excited. We're going to be in 14 schools in 11 school districts. And so that is more than doubling the programs that we have in the state of Indiana. And so things are going extremely well. Of course, we're gonna catch Ohio eventually. They don't know that yet. But
Bill's
we're
over there
coming.
like, yeah,
We're gonna catch them.
That's great. And so what does that look like for the local community of churches? So if, as we've talked about this, you're actually leaving school property to host this. And so do you have churches that are near public schools, or do you bus them both and how does that work? I'll leave it with Ben. I'll come back to Joel here in a second.
Yeah, so we have you can imagine it. We're doing it. So the students, oftentimes they're walking, but more than half of our programs now, students are being bused or shuttled to their program site. And so we have storefronts. Local churches have opened their doors to allow us to come in and created an amazing classroom for the students that sometimes it's permanent, sometimes it can be set up and torn down. But there are a lot of we have new builds, renovated homes, but it's absolutely incredible to watch the local church, the Big C church, rally together, oftentimes as a grassroots, to say, you know what, this is something we can do together. We can figure out how to give these children a Bible education together. And so there's a lot of reasons to be excited about Lifewise. That's one of my personal favorites is because we've been able to see multiple denominations rallying around a shared vision to reach the next generation with a Bible education.
And I remember one story of a church that was just located right across the street from a local elementary school. If I remember correctly, had not had a children's ministry in a long period of time. Lifewise came in, able to renovate the space in this church, and now during this school day, kids are there, and it's almost like a vacation Bible school setting, which I love. I mean, you almost get vacation Bible school when you come to Lifewise Academy. And then with the buses, you guys do a pretty good job, I think, of wrapping them. So it also becomes kind of like a rolling billboard for the community, if I remember correctly. Nope, there it is. Yeah. So Joel's holding up a bus, which is just amazing marketing there. Okay, a small bus, by the way. It's a stuffed bus that you can have to advertise the ministry. So back to you, Ben. So does Lifewise assist churches in forming all of this, locating property, and putting the effort together?
Yeah, that's one of the greatest things about Lifewise is that, you know, when you're that person who's like, okay, I love this vision, I love this strategy, and then you start thinking about all the details, it really does feel overwhelming. And one of the best things is that Lifewise walks you through hand in hand each step of the process. And so one of those steps for a lot of communities is acquiring transportation. And so we've had I know we just sold a bus a couple of weeks ago that they picked up. They went it, put it through the tests, put new tires on it, painted it, put the decals on, and made it look absolutely beautiful. And that was a tremendous service to that community, which is close to my home, where I grew up in Ohio. And so there is as much hand-on help as you need, but then also there's been communities that they have people in their community that are efficient at that type of thing. And so they're able to use their skills and gifts in that way as well. So, yeah,
Just want
we
to
provide the coaching and the resources, the training, the equipping, and it really, really is a tremendous package that you get.
I'm trying to anticipate any questions that a church leader might have. And my understanding is that primarily the release time would occur during an afternoon, maybe a study hall, an elective that the kids would have, and they can choose to go to Bible education during that time. Is that generally how it works?
Absolutely. We say oftentimes a special gets created just for release time religious instruction. And so that's really exciting. But sometimes it gets paired with another elective program as well. And some programs have even started just as a pilot program in a lunch or recess time slot, you know, so that we can prove that this is extremely effective in a public school. And so we're excited about wherever it starts because we know that as these get going, what we've seen over the past 5 years is that they grow in their number of students. And oftentimes they're growing in their number of grades and then even expanding into middle and high school. And so it's wonderful. We just got to get in the door. And so one thing I would say to pastors specifically is we know your plate is full. And so one of the best things that a pastor can do is just play a role of introduction, a ministry of introduction, because they're influential. And so we want to answer their questions and provide them with all the resources they need so that they can also share this with the people they pastor.
It's great. And so I think for church leaders, and especially when I heard about it, this was just a no-brainer. I mean, kids can actually be under the teaching of the Word of God during school day. Like, what do we need to do to make it happen? So certainly encourage pastors to check out the website. It'll be linked in the show notes of how to get involved. Joel, I want to come back to you. And before I get to the other constituency, which is public school administrators, school board members, teachers, I wanted to actually ask you just how did this idea come to you? And how did you launch? I know you were an inspirational speaker, played football at Ohio State. And so how did Lifewise happen?
Yeah, well, it invaded my life is what happened.
Okay.
My hometown of Van Wert, Ohio in 2012 started a release time program and went through the painstaking work and the long effort of figuring it all out as they went. And the result of that, though, was incredible. With it, by the third year of opening their release time program, they had over 95% of the entire public elementary school enrolled in the program. And in 2018, they reached out to me and to ask for me to help them answer the question, how is it that we have this incredible program that's legal and impactful, but you don't see it in other communities? Like, how can all these communities have a McDonald's and a YMCA and a library, but they don't have a program like this to teach their public school students the Bible? I tell people when they asked me that question and asked for my help in answering that question, that's the day I gave up sleeping, because I thought, yeah, like this is the greatest missed opportunity. I started doing the research, and then I did come to the conclusion. I mean, here we are saying, why haven't we been doing this for 70 years? Well, I know why. And it's because of all the things Ben was just talking about. Like, it's not simple. It's simple to explain. You take kids out of the school, you teach them the Bible, you bring them back. But to actually pull it off, you have to basically start a private school. You got to get a facility and transportation and curriculum and staffing and funding and all of that. And so there's good reason why it hasn't spread. And so it was in coming to that conclusion that we began to ask the question, but what if we did that work? What if we raised the millions of dollars? What if we hired the staff? What if we developed all the systems and resources and policy procedures and safety and, all of those things? Is it possible that if we were able to have a plug and play program, communities would adopt it? And that's what we're seeing happen. So we deployed our first programs in 2019. We thought we'd have this really giant goal of serving 25 schools by 2025. And here we are in 2023, and we're going to be in over 300 schools this fall.
That's amazing. Well, I so appreciate that story. And I think that could speak to so many in the audience who would consider themselves a kingdom entrepreneur. And it's sometimes as you're going through life, you're, just doing what God's called you to do. God just taps you on the shoulder and says, here's the next thing. It's going to be big. And I just so appreciate that you're willing to just, I think, maybe you do some speakings, but just basically pivot into this. And as you said, stop sleeping so you could get this off the ground. So I just so appreciate that story. So now to the other constituency, and I imagine somebody that's thinking through this. All right, okay, I get it. The churches, I'm sure, are excited, but what about public school administrators and teachers? And so how are they receiving this, and how does Lifewise Academy go about building those relationships and making sure that this works in those 321 schools?
Yeah, well, what we find is that public administrators on the front end can be hesitant, because this is, they also get hit up. Let's add one more thing. This is one of the reasons why that 10-step process that Ben was sharing about is so critical. The intuitive thing is to say, sounds like a great idea. I know the superintendent. Let me just give him a call. And we would strongly discourage that. It's so helpful to deliberately go through the planning process and building the interest and having, your list of names, your steering committee, your plan in place. And then we get to go sit down with the school and be able to have a great conversation with them to explain that, yes, this is another thing. There's no question it is another thing. However, let us show you the value. And as administrators start to hear about the way kids with religious instruction they perform better academically, they are healthier mentally, they develop in their character, and it keeps families engaged that are becoming more and more likely to disengage from the public school through homeschool, through private school. And not that we would discourage those things, but families, when there is a Bible education option associated with the public school, a lot of those families take it. And when administrators can start to hear all of those factors, they're very consistently recognizing, this is a no-brainer. This is just as much of a no-brainer for me, a principal, as it is for a pastor, because it's going to be a positive thing for my students and I don't even have to pay for it. We're seeing that about 90% of administrators, once we're able to sit down with them, are jumping on board.
Yes, I know you recently did a survey of administrators. So it was like 90% of administrators, and those, my understanding, that those are not just believers. I mean, these would be people all across the spectrum. And you also have gotten some great feedback from teachers, I believe, as well. And it struck me that, if you have an opportunity during the day to just breathe for a little bit of time while, the kids are off at Lifewise, I'm sure they welcome that as well. So what kind of response are you getting from teachers?
It's overwhelmingly positive.
Okay.
They love it. But again, it is on the front end, we will often hear some hesitation, which we understand, that there's some reticence, like, hey, how's this going to go? But then we consistently see, once the program starts, teachers love it, administrators love it. I think one administrator that maybe sums it up best, I was in his office and I did not get an indication that this man is a Christian, a believer. And he said, hey, listen, I don't know exactly what you guys are doing over there in that Lifewise program, but whatever it is, you just keep it up.
That's awesome.
That was kind of his sentiment. And that's kind of the vibe that I get from educators. They realize like these are our allies. These are people here who it's the community coming around to invest in the lives of our students. Why on earth would we want to be resistant to this?
And in the book, you dig much more deeply into this. And I have one story that really stuck out to me is I guess something was going on in the playground, and fingers are pointed as to who was responsible for violating the rules or whatever. And a kid comes up and says, well, I was taught at Lifewise that I'm supposed to be honest, so I got to fess up to what happened. Just a great like real life example of this, but of character training. And I actually was able in a meeting with a department leader here in Indiana yesterday. We're talking about mental health. I mean, every school district in the country is talking about the mental health crisis, and having an opportunity to go to a place to be loved on, to learn the word, that's a huge way to assist kids. And so I was encouraged to hear some openness from that official. One other thing that struck me as just thinking through this, talking to people about it, is certainly Christian organizations are really encouraging people to jump onto school boards. And I think that's a great development. Most Christians are going to have their greatest impact in their own zip code. So go represent your community well. But then a lot of these, Christians getting on school boards are recognizing that, especially maybe more rural areas, that they're losing a lot of good religious families because they don't have anything for the kids. They certainly can't compete with the Christian school down the street. And that really weighs on them. And this is an opportunity to help even maybe retain some of those families if they know their kids are going to religious education. So that was something that had not struck me until I started talking to people about that. So another great way that this is helping. How is Lifewise Academy doing as far as working across urban, rural, and suburban lines? Is it working kind of across the board there?
It most certainly is better than we ever anticipated. There are certainly unique challenges in those kind of three different contexts of rural, urban, and suburban. However, it's happening in all three of them. I mean, we're going to be serving upwards of 15 of the Columbus City schools this year, where I am in Central Ohio. The darkest blue place on the map of Ohio, is where we have some of our most programs. And part of that is the felt need in schools of, hey, anybody who wants to come in and help, there's an open door for those who want to come in and help. And so, and we have a guy here, Vince Coleman in Central Ohio, who's leading the charge, who's piloting this kind of, we call it Lifewise Citywide, which has its own kind of unique spin, but it's the same gospel, it's the same curriculum, just some operational distinctives. He's doing a great job here, and he's already starting to coach other cities. And so we'll be live in Memphis as well. We'll have a school open in Cincinnati, Toledo as well. He's talking to places all over. And then the suburbs, which we thought would be potentially the most challenging because they're so large and because they can become contentious in some of these discussions. It's going incredibly well there as well. And the reasons for that, there's probably several, but I get the feeling when I sit down and talk with school administrators is that they recognize, number one, this is unambiguously legal. Nobody's losing their job over something like this. Nobody's getting in trouble. The law is right here. And number two, they recognize there's a portion of the community that has been feeling shut out. And this is a great opportunity to work and engage with that segment of the community on something that's clearly positive.
So I'm certainly a friend to love Christian education, work with a lot of Christian schools, but I also know the stat is that essentially 90% of kids in the United States attend public school. And so, however Christian education grows, and I think it is growing, we'll continue. I celebrate that kids are receiving Christian education, but the Great Commission commands us to reach all people. And we can't forget about our public schools just because they're hard. And so I see this as a great way to jump back into this space. So encouraged to hear that. Joel, you had one story, and I'll leave it to you kind of what details you'd feel comfortable sharing. But I was just really encouraged that state official in Ohio, I believe the lieutenant governor, really kind of caught the vision for Lifewise and was perhaps doing some tours with you. Maybe you could share a little bit about how that happened.
Yeah, I would love to. Got a call from the lieutenant governor one afternoon, which was interesting. As I'm like, taking care of my kids, and the lieutenant governor calls me. What had happened is that his wife volunteers for a Lifewise program or signed up to learn more. And she went to him and said, "Hey, guess what? I'm going to volunteer for this Bible education program that happens during the school day." And they live in a large, affluent suburb of Columbus. And he said, no way, like that's not going to happen here, not in our district, like everybody's suing each other here about stuff. And she said, no, it's already approved, kids are going to learn the Bible during the day. And he's like, I got to learn more about this. And so he had a Lifewise rep, not myself, in to speak actually at one of his prayer meetings to share with some lawmakers in Ohio. And he was just like, I can't believe, he's probably thinking, I'm the lieutenant governor, how did I not know about this, right?
Yeah.
And so then my phone rings and he says, Joel, this is amazing. And he shares with me, he said, I've always wanted to wear my faith on my sleeve. I've always wanted to do more like what you're doing, but I've never known how. And now I feel like I'm in my position in part to be able just to shine a spotlight on things like this. And so he came to our banquet and he said, Joel, I can't write you a big check, but what I can do is I can give you an audience. And so through his Office of Faith and Community Initiatives, as well as his office that works with the public schools, he's arranging a county, we're in the midst of a county by county tour where we bring together church leaders and school leaders simply to share, hey, this is an opportunity. We're not necessarily trying to sell it, to you, other than saying, hey, here's a way the school and churches can work together that's entirely legal. It's supportive to students and to families. And I shared with the lieutenant governor when he brought this to me, I said, this isn't some sort of campaign thing. This isn't some sort of fundraiser thing. And he said, no, this is just me wanting to shine a spotlight on a great opportunity. And it has opened some incredible doors for Lifewise.
Of course, something we're encouraging through consistent project nationally, Church Ambassador Network, specifically in Indiana, and then the states that it's launched in now, 18 going to 20, is building relationships between pastors and government officials and then trying to work together with them. And this is just a no-brainer. And every state is struggling with education, with mental health, character formation, educational outcomes. And this is a great tool for helping with all of that. So I'm looking forward to, I'm sure other states are going to be picking this up as well. But I thought, what a powerful story. I'm just grateful your lieutenant governor caught the vision and was willing to assist. So Ben, back to you. Just church leaders are hearing this, maybe a school leader, school board member, superintendent might be hearing this thinking, okay, how do I get this in my county, in my city, my school? Best way to just go to the website and send that note, begin building a coalition of people in the community. But Ben, I'll leave it for you to kind of explain nuts and bolts of how people get started.
I actually had a superintendent come up to me. I gave a sermon in a church, and he said, "Hey, I think this would be a good fit for our school." And so, yeah, in that moment, I say, "Well, this is a great opportunity. We're here on Sunday morning. Let's go talk to the pastor. Let's talk about this with some people in the area." Because there are opportunities for school board members as well, superintendents, to help this thing move forward. But at the end of the day, we still need to rally the community. And so getting people more aware about the opportunity is the number one thing we need to do. And when you have conversations with people in positions of influence that are well known, and I would absolutely put a school board member and a superintendent into that boat, it's very easy for them to say, "Hey, did you know about this?" And talking to people that they know that would be willing to share what's happening. Because again, we want to build that community interest, because it takes a village. It really does, pulling that Big C church together to make this go. And so, yes, absolutely. Number one, we always want to be driving people to the website to find their school and get their name on the community interest list. But definitely using their influence, because, at the end of the day, I can tell people about this, but I'm a stranger. They're known. And when you're known and you have relationships with people, people respond to that. And so that's what I would encourage people to move forward with, and just share what you've learned here today and on this podcast.
And so we're looking forward to, we're going to launch this on a Tuesday. And on that particular Tuesday, I believe we're very close to it, there are going to be some informational meetings. So we're invested as a ministry trying to get that out, get pastors. And so I pull back just a little bit, kind of go back to a 30,000 foot view. I think it's easy because of what Joel mentioned with like the old Eluder Act, and even where a lot of people perceive the United States to be in the 50s and 60s, to kind of just despair about the future of the country. And we're just kind of throw up your hand and say, well, there's nothing that we can do. And I just refuse to accept that. I think God's moving in our times. And, what if it's just maybe we missed an opportunity, and now Lifewise is doing the hard work to make a difference. And longer I've been in ministry, and even what we see in our work is transformation happens through the Word of God. And no wonder it's working across the suburban, rural, urban divide, is because it's Scripture, right? And it's good for all people. And what if 90% of a school district are under the teaching of the Word of God? And how could that make a difference in not only the future of a community, but the future of the nation as a whole? So I was just so hopeful. I mean, this particular ministry filled me with hope, and energized for what you guys are doing. So as we come to a close, let me go first with you, Ben. Anything else that you'd like to share? If you had kind of a billboard in which to share a message to the church. I know you were working not just in Indiana, but kind of around the Midwest. So we'll start with you. Any kind of closing thoughts or something you'd like to share with church leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. If they'll take what you said with the billboard, if I were to put a billboard out there, um, I'd want a video billboard so I could give them more information. But in a short sentence, I say the church is doing this and we're still recruiting. And then I'd show them a picture of a classroom and children receiving that Bible education, because it's exciting. It's very, very exciting to be a part of something that is so much bigger than you are.
It's awesome. Joel, over to you. Closing thoughts and that specific question, if you had a billboard in which to put a message to the broader church around the country. And I know it's kind of unfair, Ben, that I don't allow video billboards, but that's the question. So Joel, any closing thoughts there?
Well, what we're finding is that when people simply understand the concept, they tend to get pretty excited. However, that is the biggest bridge that we need to build, that people don't know about the opportunity. So I'd probably want to stick with the basics of the concept. So either kind of the simple phrase of Bible education for public school students during school hours, or maybe I would use a line from the back of actually from the back of my book, and that is that decades ago we removed Bible education from the public school day. Do you want to put it back? Like that would maybe be on the billboard, or maybe I'd say now there's a chance there's an opportunity to put it back, and just invite people in that what we're proposing really is a revolution of sorts. It's a red bus revolution.
Absolutely.
We can do this. Like it's right before us, and we're seeing it happen in communities, which means it can happen in every community.
So Joel, earlier when you showed the bus, you weren't speaking. So would you mind like speaking and showing the bus? Like,
yes, here we go. Behind me, there is a bus on the wall.
Yes.
Red bus. And this is my little red squishy bus, the coveted red squishy bus. These go real fast. But one of the reasons we love it is that we believe that the bus really does kind of encapsulate the message that we're picking students up from the school, right? And we are taking them to where they will hear the Word of God as part of their public school day. And then we're bringing them back, and we're releasing those kids back into the school where they're going to be able to share that with others. And there's no community that this bus can't make it to, right? It is that simple.
Awesome. And yeah, whoever came up with that marketing idea was a genius. And so I still have mine sitting on the desk. And so I'm just trying to I'm not sure what we can do. I don't know that people would love a squishy capital to put on their desk. Maybe there's something there, but no, Joel, Ben, thank you so much for taking some time to share the story. Lifewise Academy listeners, I encourage you, please take a look at this if you feel led to jump into this, to get involved in your community. So thank you both for joining us today. We'll be praying for the ministry, excited to see where God's going to take it next.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate the opportunity.